Thank you very much. It's a big pleasure to be back in Wellington, and it's a great honor to talk to you today about the rights of the child in the digital world. Before I go into that, first some very general trends to set the scene for you. Almost all young people in the Western world are online today, and they increasingly spend more and more hours online. Every year, the hours they spend online are growing. And they do it more often nowadays by using mobile devices. So they're turning away from computers, PCs, and laptops more to camera phones and smartphones and tablets. And what we also see is that the average age of children that are online is decreasing. So in my own country, the Netherlands, the average age at the moment is 8 years old. But we see it's decreasing already. Some other percentages also from my own country is that 78% of toddlers and preschoolers are online, and even 5% of babies younger than 1 year old. And there's a similar picture in other countries too. Why is that, that even very young children are online? I will show you in a very short movie. So today we have all these wonderful devices, and children can do wonderful things with them without having to be able to read or write. So even very young children can use them. What I'm going to do today is I will give you a very brief introduction into the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child from 1989. And then I will turn to two specific topics, being online profiling, a topic that's already been extensively discussed today, but I would like to add a child rights perspective to that. And another topic that I've been working on is cyberbullying, and I want to go into that as well. But first, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Like I said, it's from 1989, so last year in November we celebrated the 25th anniversary of the convention, and it's actually a very successful convention in the sense that most of the countries in the world have ratified the convention, have accepted the convention, and are legally bound by that convention. So it's very successful. There are only a couple of countries not party to the convention, one of which is the United States. It is an important convention also from another perspective. It's not just a catalogue of human rights of children, which in itself is already very important to recognize that children are humans, are human beings, and that they have rights in and of themselves. But it's much more than that. It's a comprehensive treaty that doesn't only look at children from a legal perspective, but takes a much more holistic, integrated perspective to the situations that are important for them by also integrating developmental, social, psychological, communication science perspectives when looking at their situation and looking especially also for policy and regulation measures. Well, two important pillars of the convention are the best interests of the child and their right to be heard. The best interest of the child means that when we're looking for policy measures and regulation, we should actually focus on the child and not on all kinds of other issues like economic constraints, legal procedures, but we should focus on what is best for children, something which is often forgotten. And another thing that is often forgotten is that children actually have a right to be heard under the Convention. And that means that also when looking for ways to address the things that are dealing with on the internet, for instance, and let me say very clearly that most children are doing fine on the internet. They're actually doing very well, and even if they're in difficult situations, most of the children can deal with them. But there is a group of vulnerable children that we have to look out for. But in any case, when looking for policy and regulatory measures, we should also take into account the voices of the child themselves. So how does this all apply to the digital world? Well, to be honest, that is still an area that we're sort of exploring. We're looking for ways to see how the rights that they have apply to the digital world. And I would like to take you on that exploration today by looking at the two topics I just introduced. So first, let's have a look at online profiling. Well, imagine your children playing outside, at school, being on the sports field, being in their bedrooms even, and a growing group of people, notepad in one hand and the camera in the other, is continuously following your child, observing, recording data about them. And these people remain quiet and don't tell what they're up to, why they are doing this, what kind of information they're collecting, and how they're going to use that information. At least in this example I just gave you, the people would be visible. On the internet, and we've heard that today time and again, the same thing happens, but unless you're savvy enough, for instance, to visualize what practices actually happen, for most people they remain obscure. So what I did for this presentation, I actually made a visualization for you. Here it is. So I used an add-on in my browser. And what I did, I visited a couple of websites, 18 sites in my example, just to show you with this tool. It's called Lightbeam, by the way. You can download it into your browser if you have a Firefox browser, if you want to try it for yourself. So I visited 18 websites, and what you see is that while browsing these websites, there were all kinds of third parties which weren't the websites I was visiting that were started to track what I was doing, or perhaps even what I wasn't doing. So I was tracked by almost 5 times as much sites as I actually visited. These were basically general sites, but I also visited some specific children's websites, so there was a mix of websites. There's not a lot of research about what parents or children think about this, what I call online profiling, but I found one study by safegov.org, which is an organization for cloud computing industry experts and decision makers. And they did a study worldwide and asked parents what they thought about these online profiling practices. And they were actually deeply concerned about what was happening. So worldwide, 88% of the parents were deeply concerned about these practices. And once the researchers explained what was actually happening, so explaining more what this was about, the numbers even rose to 94%. So 94% of the parents were then deeply concerned about what was happening. Well, like I said, we're also interested in hearing what children think about this, what they know about it. And there's very little research. There is research into whether children value their privacy, and I can confirm that they do, although sometimes adults think they don't, but they do. But there's very little research into what children think about online profiling, whether they actually know what it is and whether it happens. So when we started our a European study, and Miriam already mentioned it, dynamic identity, we did an admittedly very small survey amongst about 200 to 300 10 to 18-year-olds in Europe, in 3 countries actually, in Poland, Greece and the Netherlands. And we asked them whether they had heard about online profiling and what they thought about it. Well, most teens didn't know that this was happening in our survey. And because of that, it was very difficult for them to also have an opinion about whether this was a good or bad thing, or whether they should be concerned about it, or whether it was okay. But we did ask them about that as well. So students that thought it was neither good nor bad said, well, these companies aren't able to get a good picture of me anyway, so I don't really mind that this is happening. Well, this is actually a concern I had, because if the picture is not accurate, and I did, let's go back for a moment before I introduce this. So if the picture of you that these companies generate is not accurate, they're going to use a profile of you to make decisions about you, and the data isn't correct. So that also questions whether the decision will be fine. So what I did here to show you that sometimes it isn't correct what data comes out of who you are, is I used a tool to have my Facebook data analyzed to show what kind of person I am, and then also to show to what kind of risks that could lead. So when I had it analyzed, I was very happy to see that I score very high on openness and extraversion, because I thought, well, this is a really positive thing. But when you correlate that to some of the research that is out there, it also led to some risks. And I only show you one here. So apparently I'm one to score high on career risks too. So it's very risky to employ me, because I might leave very soon again. And I must tell you, I didn't recognize myself at all in this picture, because I think I'm maybe the least professionally promiscuous person that exists on this planet. So if people or companies or organizations are going to use that to take decisions about me, the picture is not correct, and perhaps the decisions neither. Now, let's get back to the students. Well, those that thought it was a good idea to be profiled were actually quite happy to receive advertisements, to receive information that was, was specifically tailored to them, which obviously can be a positive thing. I do like to get recommendations for books, for films, and things like that. And then we had the students that thought online profiling was a bad idea, and they sort of found it creepy, because they did feel that companies were getting a lot of data about them, and they thought they were knowing too much about them, actually. So that's the picture that we started from. Well, the question then is, why is this important to even think about? So I wanted to point you at some of the harms that you could see in online profiling. And before I go into them, first let me say that the harms of online profiling are not always clear right away. Often it's about a series of acts, of activities by various actors that ultimately make people vulnerable, but very often there is no direct physical or economic harm. There can be, but very often there is not directly. However, we can identify some issues that could be, that we could have concerns about when it comes to online profiling. Well, one of which is manipulation. And Malcolm already gave us an example of, for instance, the Facebook experiment. There was a lot of controversy about that because we were used as lab rats in an experiment, and Facebook hadn't told us about that. They only did it because this research was part of an academic research, so there was a paper published, and that's how people found out. They weren't told before that. But that's only the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more happening. So that's something that came out, but there's probably a lot of things that we don't know. So in everyday online life, we're manipulated as consumers in very highly personalized online experiences. And for instance, also advert games, when we turn back to children, where children are subconsciously influenced to like certain products or to like certain brands without ever seeing the products and brands, because they're thinking they're playing a game, but it's actually marketing. Well, one of the other things that could be harmful is that online profiling can lead to discrimination and exclusions. Like I said, profiles are used to make decisions about us, and such decisions can also entail that groups of individuals are treated differently without justified reasons to do so, or some of them may be excluded from services or parts of society altogether. There was an example of, for instance, a woman in Canada that was kicked out of her health insurance because, well, she had depression, but the insurance didn't believe her. She had pictures on Facebook where she was laughing, so she couldn't have the depression because of that. And there are lots of other examples. Well, another issue is, and that's also a topic that's already been mentioned, a lack of or bad information security can also make individuals vulnerable. We have a lot of examples to that effect as well, because of identity theft or fraud when information systems of companies are hacked. So security becomes much more important when lots of sensitive data is stored about us and used. One of the other things I wanted to mention is that online profiling practices also result in a power imbalance between the big data companies and individuals. And we have to realize that privacy is a very important social value, and leaving individuals powerless can have a detrimental effect on social structures. So it's not just the individual, it's society at large too. So power can be abused if there are no adequate checks and balances in place, like accountability, like transparency, because it makes people vulnerable. And it can also have chilling effects on our behavior when we find out what's happening and what consequences it can have. It can make people feel reluctant to use certain services or technologies. So how do we deal with this normally from a legal perspective? Well, this was the Facebook experiment. Well, we use this key idea of control over our personal data, and it may be a bit different in different legal systems, but basically this is the idea. Well, it requires that we have information, substantial information about the context and the consequences of the transactions, and that we can, based on that information, provide meaningful consent. So say yes to transactions, to data processing practices. It also consent entails that we have a free choice, and that choice is directed at particular activities. So it also entails that we know very concretely, that we know in detail what is actually happening. So when we then look in practice how this all works out, I'd rather call it an illusion of control. We have no adequate information or even an information overload. It may take years for us to read all the privacy policies that are put in front of us. So there's too much information, and it's likely that a lot of individuals do not know exactly what they consent to, because the language is often very legalistic, and also the data processing practices as such are very complex. So they're very difficult for a lot of people to understand. And what is more, most online tracking on the web and leaking of data when using apps, so we're not only talking about websites, but also this surveillance technology that every one of us has in their coats, in their bags, the mobile phone. Most online tracking on the web and when we use apps happens without our consent, like the third parties that were tracking me when I was visiting those websites. They never asked me for my consent to do that. And how this data are used remains obscure, and the consequences remain abstract. So let's turn to the child rights perspective. The UN Convention is very clear on the fact that children also have a right to privacy. This is very often seen in relation to children and parents, where it obviously is also very important, but it goes much further than that. But the convention is from 1989. It doesn't say anything about the things we're looking at today. It is very clear, though, in its subsection 2, that the government must step in with laws or policy when the privacy of children is violated, when it's attacked in some way. So I've been looking for other sources to see if we can find something that would also relate to the topic we're now dealing with. And interestingly enough, the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, which is a body of independent experts that monitors the implementation of the Convention, they have a general comment on the right of the child to freedom from all forms of violence. And when it comes to violence, they also include receiving all kinds of information that may be somehow harmful to the children. This doesn't, directly relate to online profiling. You could read between the lines when you're very optimistic that misleading and manipulating could also be part of the statement that I've put on this slide here. But it is rather tenuous. So there's not a lot of information out there how we should deal from a child rights perspective with this situation. To give another perspective that somehow relates to the right to privacy is to look at it from the right to play, which is in Article 31 of the Convention, and where it's clearly stated that children have a right to engage in play and recreational activities that are appropriate to the age of the child. You could ask yourself whether playing in a highly commercialized environment where children are constantly tracked and traced are actually appropriate to children. And it is also very clear in the fact that governments have to encourage that we have those appropriate places for children to engage in play. So again, it's interesting to see, and I apologize for the big amounts of text, but it's interesting to see what they say about this. That again, the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child have put forward something on the right to play very recently, which also involves the children's right to privacy. And they're saying that all laws and policy measures which are likely to impact this right must take into consideration the best interests of the child, and this would also mean regulations relating to the privacy of children. The right to play, let me make very clear, because we may think this is something, about children having fun, so that's why we think it's important for them. But play is actually very important for the social and emotional development of children, and, experimenting with situations that may be important later on also in their adult lives. So the right to play is a very important right, and children need sort of, spaces, privacy to engage in play without adults looking over their shoulders. So it's actually a very important right, and we could relate it to online profiling. So what is actually happening when we look from a legal perspective? Well, we see in some countries that they're looking for the solution in parental consent. So children up until a certain age cannot consent to data processing themselves, but their parents have to do. Well, I don't have to explain anymore that consent isn't really working in practice, so it won't be very helpful here either, I think. We could look into other solutions, and there are also already laws out there, especially in the United States, to restrict, or if we go even further, to prohibit online profiling. But that can also be problematic in the sense that we would need very costly and strong enforcement. And it would also, if we direct it at children, we would also need to know that we're dealing with children, which very often we don't know. And children are even, they're very savvy in letting others not find out that they're children if it's in their interest. So, and we don't have the technologies, and perhaps we don't want to have the technologies, because it also means if we want to identify children that we need to process even more data that we're perhaps not processing at the moment. One other perspective, and that would also fit very well within the convention when we look at the holistic approach from the convention, is to invest in awareness raising and education, to tell children and parents what is actually happening and to give them the tools to do something against it. And that's also when we come to privacy by design, when we look at the technological solutions, by implementing the privacy principles into the technology and make them more privacy friendly for children to use. I would extend that also to children's rights by design, because there are other rights of children, like I said, the right to play, the right to freedom of information, right to education, that we could also implement into all kinds of services, games, and whatever things children are using on the internet. And very much related to that is what I call privacy as innovation, where actually other technologies, independent alternative technologies are being developed, already being developed at the moment, and this also ties in with what Dr. Siros has been talking about, where you have an option to use technologies where actually when you're communicating, it is private. It is only between the parties with which you are communicating with, and there are no third parties looking in on the communication, not the company that is providing you with the service is looking in on the communication. And these things are actually developed at the moment, and there is a worldwide network on privacy as innovation with all kinds of people gathering together to exchange views and knowledge on these ideas. But also people are within the network that are designers and actually making these kinds of technologies. So these technologies means we are not the product, but they're actually selling us a product, which is a completely different business model. So these might be the solutions that we should be looking for, or at least that we should be discussing and exploring to see if we can change the scenery a bit. So let's move on to the second topic, which is cyberbullying, a completely different topic. Well, let's first have a look at what cyberbullying actually is, because it is a term that is often used in an overly broad way, which has the danger of including too many cases which children can actually deal with perfectly well, like arguing, teasing, even fighting, and missing out on those cases that are actually harmful and where we have to protect children. So cyberbullying is defined in scientific research as intentionally aggressive, harmful behavior that has a repetitive nature and where there is a power imbalance between the bully and the person on the receiving end. So there is systematic abuse of power by the bully and often also his helpers. The bully is very often not alone, that harms a person on the receiving end. And although this definition might seem very simple at first glance, it's important to realize that bullying is very often a complex social phenomenon that may include a variety of hurtful and aggressive activities and complicated relationships, which not only include the bully and his target, but also the so-called bystanders. And these helpers can be important in sustaining bullying situations, but can also help resolving them. And I will get back to that later on. So we use this definition of bullying also when it comes to cyberbullying, but then we add that cyberbullying is this definition, but then on the internet or using digital technologies. But there are some issues by using this definition. Because on the internet, behavior is not always intentionally hurtful. There are a lot of situations where something starts out as a joke or a prank, and it cannot get out of hand, and it can lead to cyberbullying, but very often it starts as a joke. And also what you see on the internet, that a single action can already have a great impact. So if you have, for instance, an embarrassing picture, children that have been sexting in a relationship, and the relationship turns sour, and the picture is forwarded to all kinds of other people, and that can have a great impact on the person in the picture. So a single action can then have a great impact and can also then lead to cyberbullying. Okay, let's have a look at some of the general trends. I've taken them from research that we did ourselves, but also from European research, where we can see these trends as well. Offline bullying happens much more than online bullying. Cyberbullying is seen as a big problem, and it can be, but offline bullying still happens much more. And children or teens that are being bullied online are very often also bullied offline. In the study that we did, we had no child that wasn't bullied offline when it was bullied online too. So the two go together, which is very important to remember. Most bullies are not anonymous, because that's something that's being said about the internet. On the internet, it's very easy to stay anonymous, which is true, but when we look at the research that we did, is that bullying takes place in social situations and is related, there is a relation between offline and online, and because of that, children very often do know who their bullies are. So very often they are not, they're their peers. There is a difference in age. The younger children, for younger children, it's harder to know who the bullies are, but very often they are not anonymous. There is one difference when it comes to offline and online bullying. What we see on the internet is that the roles very often overlap. So bullies are victims, and victims are also bullies. So someone who's being bullied starts to bully back, you could say. In our research, we also found that the victims of cyberbullying are less satisfied with their lives, because we wanted to know what is the impact on children that are being cyberbullied. We know from bullying that it can have a great impact, can lead to depression and all kinds of other problems psychologically, but also physically. But we found also that on the internet, victims are less satisfied with their lives. We need longitudinal studies to see whether that impact lasts and whether it actually leads to harm. So there is still a lot of research to be done there. Well, let's turn again to the child rights perspective. The convention is very clear that children need to be protected against physical and mental violence, which also includes bullying. And we could also look at the right to non-discrimination, because bullying can also entail that children are being discriminated against. But to see the complete picture, and that is also what the convention asks of us, to have to take a comprehensive look at what is happening, when children are dealing with socially difficult situations, we also have to factor in other rights that they have. So they have a right to dignity. And even when children become victims of bullying, we still have to view them as rights-bearing individuals rather than primarily as victims. So this shouldn't become stigmatization of children. And we also have to factor in the fact that when children have to deal with socially difficult situations, these situations can also be important for them to learn. Obviously, we don't want them to be harmed, but there are situations that are also important for them to learn. Arguing or fighting isn't necessarily a bad thing to happen. It's something that they can develop themselves, can develop who they are, how to deal with those situations. So it's also an important thing to take into account. There's a very thin line between something that is, can be said and cannot be said. So we also have to be careful that children have a right to freedom of expression. How does that relate to things that are being said, and when is it cyberbullying and something that we don't want? So we have to see the bigger picture there. So, like I said, it's important to realize that bullying is a complex social phenomenon, and that there is no easy solution. There's also no easy legal solution. I'm a lawyer, so you would expect me to think the law may be a solution there, but I don't think it is. There is no easy solution, and the law isn't either. And we have to also be careful to not act out of emotions, out of what we very often see also in my own country, that laws are being issued at the time that we have, some incidents that are bringing a lot of emotion, a lot of anxiety in society, and where you also see that a lot of fear about technologies is being fueled also by the media because of those incidents. How sad sometimes they are. So we have to be careful there. We have to keep on thinking what will be the best solutions. Well, I was very interested to hear before coming here that actually there is now a legal development in New Zealand with the Harmful Digital Communications Bill that is currently being discussed in Parliament. So I wanted to look a bit more into the solutions that are being put forward by that bill. And I will focus on, because of the time, I will focus only on the criminal law part of the bill. So if I've understood it correctly, what the bill does, it makes it a criminal offense to post material that causes serious emotional distress or humiliation to another person, and also a criminal offense to distribute intimate images or videos without consent. We could again think about the sexting example. What is particularly interesting to me is that this would also apply to teenagers of 14 years and older. So, what do I think about this? Well, I had some concerns actually when I read what was going to be in the bill, especially the criminal law part, and what is being discussed about the bill. My first question is whether a law, and particularly criminal law, can actually prevent bullying from happening. Like I said, and I cannot repeat it, I should repeat it all the time, I think, cyberbullying is a socially very complex phenomenon, and I don't think you can actually fix it by law. Very often existing law, so the provisions in criminal law that we have, might already be able to deal with extreme cases. So we might have extreme cases where we would want to use criminal law, but it's only something we would do in the last resort. Law is also slow in the making, but also when it comes to enforcement. And on the internet, it's very important to react quickly. So it's important to have hotlines in place where you can bring your problems and have, for instance, materials taken down very quickly. Cyberbullying often starts, or bullying often starts, in a social situation between people, irrespective of the medium. Like I said, offline and online bullying are related to each other. So they're connected. And often the first doesn't exist without the latter. And what you see in the law is that it's only dealing with cyberbullying, so the two are disconnected. They're not dealt with holistically, they're disconnected. And what it also could lead to that something that is criminalized online will not be punishable offline. So you also see a discrepancy between the online and offline situation that to me is a bit weird. Then the criminalization of teens. Not all bullying behavior may intended to be harmful, especially at this age, so the age of between the years of in adolescence and puberty. Things often start out as fun, and teens are very often not aware of the impact their behavior has on others. I don't say it's a good thing, what they're doing, but very often they're not aware of the consequences. And you hear that time and time again in stories when people years later are confronted by their bully, by the people they were bullying, about their bullying behavior. Very often people hadn't realized that what they were doing was having such an impact on the people they were targeting. And also we have to factor in on the internet especially, so if we then focus on cyberbullying, that the roles there very often overlap. So we don't only have bullies, we don't only have victims, but you know, it can go both ways. So if we turn back to the convention, what the law does, it takes a legal approach to deal with cyberbullying, which is not really a holistic approach that the convention would require us to take, which would also be more focusing on support to children, on education, on awareness, on making sure that, also out of the best interest of the child, that we focus on a positive development and prevention of violence. So you could think about lessons in digital citizenship, but also digital literacy, but also more generally, how are we respectful in our behavior towards others? There was a recent study in the Netherlands where they found, for instance, positive effects on seating arrangements in classes. What they did in the study, they were putting children together that were actually not friends and putting them together in classes, and that had a positive impact on how children were dealing with each other. So they didn't have to become friends, but at least they had to get to know each other and learn how to be respectful of each other. A holistic approach would also mean that we look for evidence-based solutions. So there are a lot of studies out there on bullying and cyberbullying, but we have to keep up to date. Like I said, children are now using more and more mobile devices, so we have to make sure that we also factor them into the research. We need more insights into how offline and online bullying relate, not only how often it happens, because you very often see that it happens so much, but also what impact it has on children, whether they can deal with it or not, how it is harmful, who it is harmed, who are being harmed. So some children are more vulnerable than others, and who are these children? In order to develop solutions in practice and to know that they are effective, we have to have more information about that too. So when we turn back to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, they have in their general comment, the one I just mentioned, they have a whole list, a broad range of other measures which must be used and be effective in order to prevent and respond to all forms of violence, including bullying. And I've only put a few possible ones on this slide, because the list that they have is very extensive. Collaboration with the industry, and what I have added is collaboration also with a lot of other organizations, like online safety organizations, hotlines, and so on, because we need their support if we want to address cyberbullying, especially if we want to have materials taken down very quickly. And there is some work to be done there as well. We can back that up with legislation, like notice and takedown procedures, but we see also in practice that very often these procedures are too difficult for parents to use. They're not uniform, they're very bureaucratic, and you have to know a lot about how they work in order to use them effectively. So in practice, you can back that up by law, but in practice, there's still a lot that needs to be done. We need to make sure that we work on empowerment of children by learning them the right life skills, by making sure they develop positive peer relations, and that can also help prevent bullying. So it's not a legal perspective, but it's more on education and making sure that they know how to deal with situations. And involve the children themselves, because they know what's going on. Well, I'd like to end my presentation, and I apologize for the big amount of text on this slide, although I'm a lawyer, so you can't expect this to happen. But I thought it was very important to show to you here. Again, this is from the general comment from the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, and it's on how they think we should deal with issues of bullying. It's very important, they say, that children participate in the development of prevention strategies. In particular, they also mention prevention of bullying. It's also important that we strengthen the children's own capacity to eliminate violence, so to empower them to make sure that they can deal with socially difficult situations. And when we're looking for measures, we need sensitive measures that are needed to ensure that child protection interventions do not further disempower children, but rather contribute positively to their recovery and reintegration, also by participation of the child. So to conclude, it's very important that we take action to prevent harm from happening, but we need to be very careful of the kind of action that we take. And with that, I would like to thank you for listening.